Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Morgoth from Morgoth's Review. He is an online blogger from the dissident right sphere. He's been blogging since 2014, 2015, evading somehow the landmines that have historically been used to silence voices that criticize certain liberal, neoliberal policies. In this conversation, we explore the failure of the British government to protect the British citizens, and we also talk about the history of the dissident right online discourse. You can find Morgoth's work via the links below, and if you enjoy this content, consider liking, subscribing, and donating, also via the links below. Without further ado, here is Morgoth.
I prefer blogging anyway. That's how I originally started, was blogging. And then I died away and I was doing YouTube, and then more recently, the last few years, I've gone back with Substack. And surprisingly, it made a comeback. It was blogging was seemed like a dead thing. And then Substack, it came back, and that was where I originally started. So yeah, it
Huh.
was
Full circle.
I've come full circle.
Yeah. Do you mind if we just dive in? Because I have a opening question now that we've
Yeah,
talked
go
about
for
that.
it. Yeah.
How did you, what prompted you to start blogging on the internet? Or what was the first idea that you felt the need to express?
Well, if you go back to, I've told this story before, but it is like the origin story. In about 2014, which is some time ago now, the Daily Telegraph had this little window. They had a blogging section, but obviously it was for the in-house writers. But they had the comments underneath the Daily Telegraph was you had like an 18-month window where anything went, where they genuinely kind of went in on free speech. And so it became this sort of hub for disaffected right wingers and nationalist types in Britain. And that was where I met Millennial Wars, as well as a few other people who kind of lurked and hung around there. Um, and then eventually it got a little bit too much. The paper changed hands, and that got shut down. But they started banning people, and one of the writers, I ended up getting banned a lot. And what I did was run through various kind of Tolkien style names, um, because then people would know it was me when I came back. They
Yeah.
knew the brand. And one of the writers actually said, look, well, instead of complaining all of the time that you're being banned, you can always just go off and set up your own blogs. And that's what I did. And it just so happened that I've got a bit of a cold. It just so happened that the sort of avatar that I was using when I decided to do that was Morgoth of the Tolkien sort of line.
Yeah.
And I
He
opened
was a
the
Valinor, right? He was like the precedent to Sauron.
Yeah,
If I-
he's kind of like the original sort of satanic figure. So I've had a lot of heat for that over the years. It's like, why have you named yourself after Satan? And I say, well, that
Hmm.
it wasn't really like that. It was more that I just landed on this one when I opened the blog. There's nothing really deep to it.
Huh. Well,
Um,
there's an argument to be made about some of the pre-liberal ideas intruding on the garden of liberalism and tempting people to bite the apple and fall from
y-
the
yeah,
utopia.
there was a bit, I think, of leaning into the idea like I am the bad guy kind of thing from a liberal perspective, I think. But anyway, I opened up Morgoth's Review, which was the original, like an old blogger blog, which was wild, which had a really active comment section, and it
Hmm.
got quite popular. And but it got a bit too. I began to get a little bit nervous because I was sitting on hundreds of thousands of quite sort of borderline comments.
Uh-huh.
And I'm in Britain where we don't have free speech. And I also just didn't want the blog to be taken down. But it was great. It was a great run for quite some time, and it was sort of my main home.
So
But I
from what,
began,
like 2015 to
yeah, it was
when?
about from 20, and then I mothballed it. If I think in 2018, I put it on
Okay.
private. And I use the dashboard now for working and storing ideas and things. Um, and what I wanted to do as well was, if you go all the way back in the British scene at that time, um, as far as the kind of right wing sort of nationalistic style commentary was concerned, there was almost nothing then. When you go back like sort of 2014, 2015. I mean, I remember the alternative right sort of scene was just burgeoning then, and I would have like two podcasts a week to listen to, or something like that. That was it. That was all of the content that there was,
Hmm.
or at least that I was aware of. And one of the things that I really enjoyed was I became aware of Countercurrents, Greg Johnson's site, and I was fascinated that they had sort of in-depth reviews of movies and sort of pop culture things, which I'd never seen before. Now we take that for granted.
Hmm.
But at the time, I'd never seen anything like that. And I loved films and that kind of thing. And I was fascinated to read these kind of dissections. So let's say like dissections of the latest Star Wars film or something, or a
Yeah.
James Bond movie, but from in this case, it would be like from a white nationalist perspective,
Okay.
and I thought this was fascinating. And when I came to open my own blog, Morgoth's review, that was on there. And so I wanted to have a kind of a pop cultural kind of
Yeah.
theme where, and I didn't want it to be explicitly just the same as every other kind of racialist blog out there. I wanted
Hmm.
to leave myself a large sort of scope to wriggle around in and play with different ideas and learn and explore things. And so that's kind of the approach that I went in on with. It's probably the same as what I do now. I don't like being pinned down and into
Yeah.
certain things. But I mean, over the way, which is like 9 years, um, I've probably developed me thinking and fleshed things out a little bit more, which
Well, one would
I could
hope
probably get into.
you just
Hmm?
didn't. One would hope you didn't stay in the same spot 10 years down the road.
Yeah, I mean, the eventually, of course, I went to YouTube, and it just so happened then, because then it was you really had to watch what you were saying,
Yep.
um, and I began at the one. I think what I did like series, and I became kind of fixated on the video essay format. But it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's really a lot of work, and I didn't have any kind of background in doing that. I had to learn it all, and but I think there was a kind of golden age of this kind of content where after the big censorship came in, after the Trump came in on the first one, the
Yeah.
first presidency, I think there was a kind of filtering process happened. And I was one of those ones that was like the last, it left there. It's the left
What do you think
standing.
made you adaptive to the changing environment?
Um, Well, I mean, I did take some hits. I have been censored. I lost Patreon and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think it was mainly because, well, there was two things. I was well aware that I was living in kind of a police state with Britain, so I couldn't just take these things for granted.
Yeah.
But I just don't believe in liberalism. So in Britain, it's kind of explicit that if you say certain things, you will get in trouble. But I think it's also that I don't actually believe the bullshit of liberalism. Like I was always conscious that you just couldn't. I remember I wrote an article, one of the earlier ones, and I actually predicted the Great Shutdown, I called it. This was about 2015. And I said, like, this is before I'd read, like Carl Schmitt or the Burnham and all of this.
Yeah.
It was just a good feeling that I had that, like, if we are correct, um, it stands to read, and we are obviously gaining traction. We're becoming popular. These ideas and talking points are beginning to travel very far. But if we are correct in the analysis, then they will have to shut us down. Like because eventually it's going to reach a sort of critical mass
Yeah.
that they'll just have to do it for their own sake.
Hmm.
And I was thinking, but this is not a particularly liberal perspective anymore. This is like this is as if to say, I just don't believe that they believe in their own stated values. And that's actually what happened. But and I was kind of prepared for that. I was kind of waiting for that to happen. So I was already being quite careful. And so on YouTube, people started getting banned left, right, and center. And I ended up just being a kind of last man standing kind of thing.
Hmm.
There was only me and four or five others of the network left.
Yeah.
And there was a sort of I began to do a lot of like videos on Spangler and this kind of thing, a bit more because you could kind of pitch it over the heads of the censors, and
If
flesh
you
out.
took
So
on like more academic kind of
yeah,
dressing. Yeah.
yeah, which always interested me anyway. But and obviously that became the Spengler became a massive influence on how I began to look at the world and formulate ideas. And you had a sort of there was a kind of period, I'd say between, say, 2018 to 2022 or something, when there was like a hotbed of interesting ideas and great video essays going up on YouTube.
Hmm.
And it was kind of strange because it would be like you had the sort of the thinker of the month. So one month it would be like Julius Evola, then
Yeah.
everybody would jump onto Spengler, then everybody would jump onto like Machiavelli, and it would and it would all go that way. There was this canon being discovered, and we're finding now like we're kind of beyond that sort of thing.
Hmm.
But I'm kind of like still so yeah. I've still not moved on from Spengler, even though he came in and then went out of fashion, and I'm still
Hmm.
kind of fascinated by that worldview.
So before we get to Spangler, I want to dive into him. I just read Blood Meridian and going through a lot of video essays on that book by Cormac McCarthy. And one video explicitly dives into the Spanglerian aspect of his worldview or the worldview that's elicited in that novel. So I want to get to there, but uh, just discussing or remembering the 2014 to 2018 period before things got really seems things got bookish later. What were the main theses and ideas and kind of the tone of the, I don't even think it was dissonant, right? You said the nationalist or even the white nationalist discourse. What were the ideas that people were feeding on before they went into, the precedents of these ideas?
There was I think a lot of them was in, I can only speak for sort of if you think of it as I am a node on a network,
Yeah.
and then you'd have, say, academic agent would be next door, and then on the other side there would be like Dave distributist, and you
Hmm.
had Charlemagne who was a bit more active. A little bit later, or McIntyre came along, and
Yeah.
so, and I think what it was to take a step back from it was that a lot of the sort of out and out nationalists had just been banned. And what was left over were the more neo reactionary types, who had come from sort of Curtis Yarvin, but then they were going back into like where his ideas has
Yeah.
originated from. So you began to see the arrival into the discussion of people like James Burnham and Thomas Carlyle. Um, and so this, and as well as a kind of sort of contempt for democracy and liberalism, which weirdly enough wasn't so much of a thing with the white nationalists. So white nationalists tended to think, well, we're going to red pill everybody, reach a critical mass, and then we're going to
Mm.
take over.
Yeah.
Um, and some of the talking points were they would go places, I always thought, to do with certain sort of elite groups and racial talk and things, which the more neo-reactionaries weren't too comfortable with, which in the end is probably why they survived on YouTube and the others got all banned.
Do you think they were right
Um,
for being uncomfortable with those ideas? Not just for the fallout of them, but because there's something in those ideas that isn't tentative or yeah, tenable for a political movement. It's
I do, I
unstable.
do. Well, I think it was because a lot of them were coming from different places where they'd never really been exposed to them before at that point. But eventually, I think everybody's kind of got there anyway. It's just the
Hmm.
language that would they would use would be a bit more sophisticated and a bit more nuanced than the sort of Daily Storm are as
Yeah.
offensive as possible to just sort of short circuit political correctness with offensiveness,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have arrived at the same place, really. Especially you sort of refined it again through something like Elite Theory, where
Hmm.
it's just about a network of people who have got a kind of common bond and a common thing, and they're working towards their own ends. So everybody kind of got there anyway,
Hmm.
in that way. And
With the
anyway,
analysis.
that's
Yeah.
that's that. I was kind of a relic, and I just sort of looked at what people are talking about, and I thought it was interesting, and I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was educational. And I began my own sort of spin on it. It's funny you should say it because I've just read Blood Meridian as well a month or two back. I,
Really.
I wasn't too, I'm not sure what the Spengler connection is there. I've never heard that before.
It's about the notion of. There's one analysis that I listened to about the notion of historical epochs being outside of the control of human beings, kind of not something you can direct, and it's not even linear. It just kind of arises. These periods of history kind of arise on their own by network effects rather than this linear, this person did this, and then this thought led to that thought, from one analysis. But I'm wondering, there is more of an Evola like mythological aspect to McCarthy's work, Blood Meridian specifically. I don't know if does Spangler have a what's his aesthetic? Is there a Spanglerian aesthetic, or is it more of an analysis from your point of view?
It's an analysis, but each civilization would have its own sort of inbuilt metaphysics and way of expressing itself.
Okay.
Um, and so it's funny because in something like Blood Meridian is interesting because if you think of the Western advance of what Spengler would call Faustian civilization, in the case of Blood Meridian, where they are in the sort of the Mexican border going down into Mexico, it's like they are on the very frontier
Hmm.
of Western expansion. And it's as if like civilization has not actually reached there yet, but it will at some point. And in fact, the final sort of closing of it
Yeah.
is this idea that, well, the fences are going up, the barbed wire's going up, and so that kind of untamed barbarism will be put to, there'll be an end to it, no matter what the judge has to say. I
Yeah.
suppose the violence and the war would just be on the scale of nations, more than that. But I mean, there
Hmm.
is a profoundly pessimistic, I find, view of man in McCarthy, which I tend to share, which
Really.
kind of roots back into a sense of groups and the idea that sort of a universal man, as we're forced to believe today, just becomes preposterous.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, something which has been in the news again recently, for example, is the grooming gangs thing
Yeah, I was
in
going to
England.
bring that up. What does that show
And
us about that civilization and the civilization of the British elite that are allowing that or have allowed that to
well,
happen?
yeah, but I think if there's two ways there's a few different ways you can approach it, but let's just say that the idea was that you would create a kind of globalized economicus, Homo economicus man,
Hmm.
and that these groups that were coming in were going to assimilate and integrate, as they put it, to being 90s liberals. And then they would just watch TV, they'd just be good consumers and all the rest of it. And then this, as a worldview, was like forced on the native population. But what you get, and it's kind of how I ended up with the opinions that I had, was seeing this. I traveled around Europe, so I saw it all. It wasn't just an internet thing. I lived in Belgium for 10 years and worked in Holland, and so I traveled all around Europe and I saw what was going on. And my kind of liberal sort of assumptions were just completely smashed to pieces, not because of what I saw on the internet, but because of what I saw in real world. I could see that the reality was that everybody was tribal except for us. I could also see, even in my place of work, that the there was almost no empathy shown by outgroups towards the Europeans.
Hmm.
They would whisper and talk amongst themselves while looking at the Europeans. And this kind of game of allotting everybody an equal portion of empathy, it just seemed ridiculous to me. It just seemed like a total farce. And it was destroying us. And so when you tie that back to the grooming gangs, where this is where you see it at its most catastrophic, is where the foxes are in the hen house. Um, and
There's a
what
Burnhamian joke about the foxes also allowing foxes into the hen house. But
Yeah, yeah. And so anyway, the way I looked at it was that this is this is a con trick. This is nonsense. We are being taken to the cleaners here, and here you have it where these people aren't 90s liberals, they are tribal. It's I mean, look, it's not up to me to decipher how much influence the Quran has had over this behavior or not. What interests me is that they are the other, they're in our country and they're behaving like barbarians, and I want them out.
mhm.
Um, and all these moral assumptions just fell away. It was just like a sort of cobweb in the wind. It was just gone. And I realized that actually the even within a group, man is a bit of a bastard. But when that's between groups, it is blood meridian. It is to me, blood meridian is a world where empathy just doesn't exist, and it seems kind of hyperbolic, but look, we're
Hmm.
talking about tens of thousands of girls who've been tortured, and so it seemed this kind of profoundly pessimistic view of I just think is realistic, and it's kind of depressing, and so all you really think the safest option is to at all costs make sure that you've got a patch of land which is for your tribe,
Hmm.
and that will supersede economic concerns or anything else. But of course, this isn't a particularly popular view with the establishment.
Well, I don't think a lot of people can even comprehend. You say tens of thousands of girls being abused. I don't think most people can comprehend that. We're much closer to, I guess, Russia invading Ukraine or October 7th of what was it, 2023? Like what's happening in Israel and what's happening in Ukraine is much closer to at least the American imagination than tens of thousands of white girls being abducted and systematically abused. And then the perpetrators of that abuse being protected by the system, by the British system. Like, I don't think we can comprehend that. I don't think we have the ability to think of the other as the other.
And it's one of them things where the numbers. This is why when this story blew up a few weeks ago, it started with a screenshot of a transcript of what had happened in a court, and so then it becomes whittled down to just one.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, I think, I mean, there's so many. I actually was reading the transcripts from places like Oxford, like back in 2015. So I knew all about this. That it wasn't just rape, it wasn't this disgusting term groomer. It was torture.
Yeah.
Again, it is just it is this raw, bestial nature
Yeah.
of humans
A
against humans.
radical departure from any sort of civility.
Yeah,
Like so alien.
it reads something like when the Soviets ruled to Germany at the end of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. It's difficult for people to comprehend that. It's difficult for people to comprehend. It becomes like numbers. And that's why I
Mhm.
say when you whittle it down to one girl who has been plied with drink, and then she's been raped by what, 8 men, and then she makes this desperate kind of bolt for the door. She picks up a bat, as if to try and a pathetic last stand from like a young teenage girl. And the bat's taken off her. She's smacked over the head with it, and then she's raped with the bat as well. And this kind of sadism and barbarism, I think it kind of
Mhm.
it kind of does something to you when you read it, and when you read it over and over and over again, and it kind of burns out a part of you,
Mhm.
where you find. Well, I mean, this will be good on YouTube, but you find yourself having dark thoughts. You find that this has to end no matter what.
Well,
You know,
yeah, but imagine the blowback to peaceful Pakistanis. The Norm Macdonald joke holds because
yeah,
it's true,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Imagine that. Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that came out was that we can't be dispensing collective justice, and you get to a point where you think, I don't care. I don't care about this anymore. Yeah, I mean, some people would say, well, these kind of cold Machiavellian types. So maybe you've got to think about this rationally and go, no, no.
Mm.
I think that's something. I think one of the problems that the British population is so demoralized is because you never get the sense that you're gonna get your catharsis. The mind has been trained in such a way where eventually the bad guys will be vanquished and justice will be done, but um, things will work out all right in the end. And
Yeah,
this just isn't really how it
yeah.
works in the real world.
Well, the we can't not rely on the process because we are afraid of everything descending into chaos. But we can't at the same time exert violence. There's no such thing as we're so far removed from public executions, that catharsis, and then also the witnessing of the consequences of certain behaviors. That's so abstracted now that all we have is kind of this either empathy for the victim and then victimizing the villain, right? The villain we have to see as a victim too, like with the Neil Gaiman stuff. You kind of go back, well, he was abused as a child and stuff like that, and so he's perpetuating the abuse. We always kind of think in terms of, we always psychologize now. I don't see how you not do that. And especially, I don't see how you express anything in the information environment we are now. People don't want to touch that. But I think there's a thirst for that. But where does that go? What can you do? Write essays, write blogs?
Yeah. And try to perfect your anger game, if you like.
Well,
It's
yeah.
it's a terrible thing. And
Hmm.
what's worse is that you're aware that there's other people kind of looking on you. The Americans do this, which annoys a lot of people, where it's like, why basically why hasn't there been mass action? Why hasn't this happened? Why hasn't that happened? And it's as if to touch a raw nerve, because we are also thinking, why is this still going on? Why hasn't it? I mean, in actual fact, there has been protests, lots of protests. There's been lots of different things going on. There's been
Hmm.
people driven to like terrorism because of it. There's people driven mad because of it. But the point is taken that it's a sore one, because you have to actually look in at what's gone fundamentally wrong with
Yeah.
British society.
Yeah.
What why and you begin to piece it all together, and begin to realize the sort of the job that's been done on us. There used to be a lot more pushback than what there is now. And I think now people are just trying to kind of get away from it as much as they can, and cope, basically. But everybody's sort of quietly seething and resentful,
Hmm.
and hurt by it. I wrote a blog last week, where because a subject that fascinates me is Chernobyl and what happened with Chernobyl. Um, and I wrote an article last week saying it's kind of like our Reactor 5. It's as the grooming issue in Britain is it's where everything in a managerial structure It's kind of like the fault line. It's where it all comes together. It's where the ideology of the state, the corruption of the state, the moral bankruptcy of the state, and how bad its ideas are. You can list it all. It all comes together on this issue in the same way that Chernobyl wasn't just about having something go wrong and a radiation cloud go all over Europe.
Yeah.
It was also it exposed everything which was wrong with the system itself, right into the heart of it, right into the core sort of foundations of it.
Hmm.
Which is why some people will kind of say that that was when people just began to give up.
Yeah.
That was when they were wandering around conscious of the lie and just sort of waiting for it all to be over, nodding when they had to, and going through the motions. But fundamentally, it was just we can't believe in this bullshit anymore. It
Yeah.
still exists as a power,
Yeah.
but that's it. That's all it is. The political formula has just sort of evaporated.
I was speaking with Connor Tomlinson of the Lotus Eaters a few months ago, and he was talking about the decay in London because of mass migration. We weren't talking about the grooming gangs, so-called grooming is just a terrible word for it, but it's the safe word for that. But it came to my mind that there is a lack of leverage that any sort of, I mean, king, like King Charles, even if he wasn't a king in name only, like Kino, I guess would be called. But because of American power propping up Britain and Canada, the British populace can't vie for itself. The Canadian populace can't have any sort of nationalism because they are basically vassal states of the American empire. And I don't think that there is enough leverage for Britain to stand for Britain until it has to stand on its own 2 feet. In a way, does that make sense to you? Does that resonate at all? That
Well, it
it's
does.
because there's no accountability because all the accountability goes eventually to the American government.
I mean, not many people in Britain would see it that way at all.
Okay.
They don't look at Washington DC being our government. They do look at London and Westminster as being where accountability lies. I think if you had to say, well, in the end, the grooming gangs, for example, are the problem of the American government. There's no way you're ever going to make that stick. So the politicians in Britain will have to take accountability for it, and that's the discussion which is going on right now. But
Hmm.
it is on a wider kind of perspective. I do agree with that. You've got these things going on where America seems to be. I was just talking about this before with a couple of people where America seems to be about to retreat from the world. And the discussion we were having, like, where does this leave the British right? Because do you then, and it looks like people like Musk and Trump want to have Farage and Reform as their point man. When you know, if you go back some decades, that was actually Britain's role within the European Union was to be a kind of American tentacle, and that's why so many of the French, especially, just hated they hated Britain being in the European Union because they knew exactly what it was.
Yeah.
If anything, Britain made the European Union more liberal. And it was more of a protectionist bloc, whereas you always had more laissez-faire, neoliberal sort of, Thatcher and all of that. They
Hmm.
were, it was all, we were always a pain in the backside of the European Union. And so now, when you see where this is going, it's kind of like it's going to be a repeat because it looks shocking what the signs that are coming out of America looks absolutely shocking, to be honest. Where America in the strategy games they call it turtling, where you just
Hmm.
throw up these big borders around yourself and kind of retrench yourself and just fend off the world. And it looks a little bit like that's what America is going to do. And so in Britain, the question, which isn't here yet, but will be coming soon, is do we then carry on being this kind of America's point man in Europe, or will we go in on with Europe and kind of cut ties? And I think this is a lot of the tension with the Labour government because I think somebody like Keir Starmer is probably quite eager to just sever ties and jump all in on Europe. And then you got all other kind of complications with the Ukraine war and all of this. And I think, where in my own sort of gut is telling me to try and just sever ties with America and go with Europe because I just the actions of America seem kind of repulsive. I don't like this
Mm.
bullying, bombastic talk about taking over Greenland and flexing on a country like Denmark. The
Yeah.
same with Canada. It irritates me. I don't like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And worst of all, and obviously, you're getting a kind of change in the government. But worst of all is that there was this like insistence that places like Germany go all in against Russia, which was against their interests, which they did. And in Germany's case, it's been catastrophic because for mysteriously the Nord Stream pipeline got blew up, so their
Mm.
energy supplies are wrecked.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, so they went all in. They gave every missile they had. They cost them hundreds of billions. We're going to be in this with Ukraine and Zelensky to the bitter end. And now it's like the Americans are saying, "Well, we're cutting the ties. Cheers, suckers.
Yeah.
You get to hold the ball on this. We're off. We're off to conquer Canada and hide behind tariffs and actually make friends with Putin. We are on his
Yeah.
doorstep, and we encourage you to fire missiles. It's a disgusting thing to do. What the hell is this about? And
Yeah.
so, from my perspective, I'm thinking, look, I think it was Orwell said something similar, where it was like, America is useless. America is dangerous as an enemy and ruinous as a friend. You,
Huh.
you
Yeah.
you've just got to say at this point, just on the basis of what Trump's saying, I'm thinking I'd prefer to try and get with the Europeans because you just can't trust this. This is
Well,
this
yeah,
is
I think that that would ultimately possibly be a good thing. That irritation that you feel towards America and saying, okay, well, we're competitors now. You're no longer a sugar daddy in a lot of ways, would force Britain and Europe to stand on its own 2 feet and then to take a very hard look at American style liberalism, neoliberalism, and stuff, and start to take care of their own. Because they no longer have, well, I don't know to what degree we're supporting you guys militarily, but we have for a long time footed the bill for that. If you guys have to stand on your own 2 feet, then that will put more pressure on your leaders, not just to take accountability for things that are going wrong, but to take responsibility in a positive sense for the direction of the country. And then that would possibly lead to a cascade effect where this instance of these grooming gangs would be stamped out, and then mass immigration would be stamped out because I don't know. I could see it possibly being good for
I mean,
Europe.
it is convenient that the big scare the one of the reasons that America like kept such a close eye on Germany in particular was because Germany would have been prone to cozying up with Russia. So you ended up having German technological brilliance and then like Russia's endless resources
Hmm.
making it all happen. It's like a kind of partnership in heaven. And so this is now completely smashed. And it's kind of convenient that that happens just before, it's maybe it is a
Hmm.
conspiracy. I don't know. But if there was a deep state and it just continues on with a long-term plan, then
Yeah.
yeah, that seems like you kind of have to doff your cap at it. On the other hand, if it is the case, I don't know for certain. I'm just, just
Yeah.
it is absolutely repulsive. If this was like a kind of 7-year plan to what did they used to say, keep Russia out and Germany down.
Mm.
Well, Russia's definitely out and Germany's definitely down.
Hmm.
But yeah, so what I think you would see would be in Europe, whether or not Britain would even be allowed in, I don't know. But because obviously though you had Brexit and everything like that. But I think what you would find in Europe was that there would be confusion and they'd lick their wounds for a time. And then gradually the I think all of the air would be taken out of the kind of libtard globalist factions who run it.
Mm.
They'd be completely demoralized, and you would begin to see pretty radical right movements popping up like mushrooms all over Europe. And whether or not Peter Thiel is going to come in with Palantir and kind of cripple them and shut them down is
Yeah.
again is up for grabs. We'd have to see, but I definitely think in this kind of new what do they call it, multipolar world.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
It'll be like everybody trying to find their place, and I would expect the European Union to huddle together looking for security. And I don't think the Liberals would hold it together. I mean, it could descend into some kind of left wing socialist madness as well. There's
You
there's a
think?
there's a lot of like old school kind of leftists on the continent, but this is all just pure speculation.
Yeah.
But with that kind of reorganizing and reshuffling of everything, yeah, you may well see people beginning to rethink multiculturalism itself, and how it's been done, like that as if that was a something which we'd been through and it was past, the economic incentives have changed, and all this kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, speaking of multiculturalism, it can scale to a certain degree. I don't think it can scale worldwide, but it could possibly be the case that Europe as a bloc can at once sustain the difference and then harmonize those differences to a certain degree. I don't know if you're going to go all the way to Turkey or even all the way to Greece, but there's already the seeds of multiculturalism in the European Union. And then the necessity of some sort of harmony between all those different interests as a unified will to maintain a certain standard of living. So I'm wondering, doesn't there have to be some level of liberalism in order to harmonize differences and to speak across different cultures just within the European continent?
It's that does, and what it was, what I remember when I first saw the Euro notes, and they were the most boring, blandest things I'd ever seen. It was
What
just
is
all
this?
these the Euro notes, the currency.
Oh, okay.
The currency is called a euro in the
Yeah,
European
okay.
Union. And the currency itself, if you look at the designs, it's the most boring thing you can ever imagine. It's just these like sort of generic archways and bridges and things,
Yeah.
which they could be in Austria, they could be in Italy, they could be in France. And it was deliberately not tapping into any kind of underlying European identity or sentiment, because what they thought was that what binded them together would be the liberalism of the post-war order,
Hmm.
together with its founding mythos, of course, baked in. And so the question then becomes, if we are to head into another kind of post-liberal, post-war liberalism, what becomes the common factor? Now, it could just be pragmatism, where
Hmm.
because you've got the BRICS, you've got Russia and China, and we're going to have to huddle together to weather this out. I think that actually could work, and they'd muddle along, without some kind of overarching binding thing. A more skillful politician could weave in a common European. They pay lip service to this, but everybody knows it's just neoliberal kind of vanilla gloop.
Hmm.
But I think they could actually do that, because, in a way, the European identity has been so watered down, for so long, that it's kind of ripe for to have something planted on it as a continent as a whole with a common destiny.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
so
hard to imagine drawing too deeply on European history because European history is inter-European conflict. So
hmm,
how would you lift that up at the same time as decreasing the conflict or like not underscoring the conflict?
yeah. Yeah, that's the problem with doing that, and you also tap into nationalism. So
Yeah,
you would have to be doing that. You'd have to be careful with doing that because then you may find that the Germans they don't like paying all this tax to help out Greece or this kind
yeah,
of thing.
yeah.
And this is what this is what they're going to have to deal with. Assuming that's how things go, assuming how it plays out all like that.
In discussing, post-liberalism from an American point of view, the question of religion constantly pops up, Christian nationalism being kind of the memeified version of that. But in order to collect people and unite them, in America, it's viable for there to be a religious aspect to it. Now, how strong a religious aspect or weak a religious aspect is an open question, but I don't see how, or from your point of view, to what degree can religion form some sort of bond between modern Europeans, post-liberal or liberal Europeans, as they venture into a post-liberal kind of dynamism?
I don't think so. I don't think
Yeah,
they would do that at all. I think Europe's much more atheistic than America.
yeah,
So I don't see religion making a comeback in that context. I think, but it is true that is a great binding force. It was funny because I was just watching a documentary last night about the First Crusade, and there you obviously had something which was really quite wonderful in binding the Europeans together in common cause.
yeah,
But what that could be in the future, I don't think it will be religious. I think, if anything, it may be racial. I think it'll be the idea that we are shrinking in numbers, both sort of on the world stage and elsewhere. We're under threat on all sides, and you could get this kind of isolationist introversion. It would be a sort of leave us alone. We don't want to know. Remember, whatever happens, there's going to be like endless millions of Africans moving north to try and get across the Mediterranean. So you're going to have all these pragmatic concerns,
hmm
which everybody in Europe is already fed up with. And
yeah,
so you will have this kind of, what are they going to do to stop that? Is it going to be where the primary purpose of a joint European navy is just to go in the Mediterranean and prevent like the endless millions coming in from Africa? And you'd
mm-hmm.
have all because but what that does is it kind of compounds this sense that we are different and we're under threat. But it's a kind of quivering, paranoid future that Europe would have, rather than being something as if to say, right, we're back. We've been cooks for 60 years, and now we're back and we're going to start slapping people around. I just don't see that happening. I
Yeah,
think I
well,
think
yeah,
it's an existential issue, which will see them kind of doing their best to weather the storm and keep the world out, which is
yeah,
kind of what, in a way, what the European Union is. It's why
yeah,
I also don't think it'll expand very much further either, because the only ways that it can expand are towards Turkey, which would just rip them off and take them for mugs. And then you've got the further east, towards Russia. Well, they've already burned all those bridges. So I see a kind of a paranoid, protectionist sort of Europe scared going
hmm
for, but it might well stabilize and be better than what it is now.
Well, one aspect of Trump's expansionist rhetoric, as opposed to his isolationist rhetoric in the 2016 era of Trump, America first kind of stuff. Now it's like, no, America is America, and we're going to expand the borders. There's a different energy to expansion than there is to isolationism. Expansion is inherently more strong, and if I don't see this happening, but if Europe not only just drew its borders, but also said, well, we're going to civilize the world too, or we're going to take over the Mediterranean, we're going to have Roman Empire part two, what I guess would be part three because there was the colonial era. I see that as more of a positive, inspired, galvanizing force rather than I don't see how else Europe has pride in itself other than being, the elite capital of the world, which they were post to a certain extent post World War II. Americans looked on Europe after they rebuilt themselves as, they were arbiters of like the French cinema and British ways of doing things. There was kind of a romantic aspect of Europe being the pinnacle of culture. And I wonder how, on a romantic, mythic level, Europe can recapture some of that glory and then galvanize its population, one, to defend itself, and then two, to reproduce itself, too, because you're going to have to onboard women to this as well if you want more babies. If you want replacement population, you need to onboard women to whatever mythos that you have.
I mean, my my general sort of sentiment here, like I'm not an optimist.
Yeah, yeah,
And so well, the way I look at this is that there was it's a Spenglerian book as well by what is it? He's got like a French name. It's called The Coming Caesars. And
hmm,
it's down on I'm looking at my books. It's Rene something or other, some French writer, or at least his name is French. And he drew this long analogy between, sort of basing it on Spengler, where saying that Europe is the Greece and America is the Rome.
yeah,
And the amount of kind of similarities and the historical trajectory is absolutely fascinating. It's really interesting. And I mean, it's the thing is, I don't even think it's just a European problem. I think America is also going into the like sort of winter. It's also going, even if let's just say Trump does all of this, I think it's the end of American. It sounds kind of strange. Well, we talked about invading Canada and Greenland, and it's the end.
yeah,
You're not expanding. But yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. I think it's them saying this is the equivalent of the Roman wall going up and saying, like, this is it. This is as far as we go. We're tired. We're run down. We tried, we had tentacles out all over the world,
yeah,
and now it's kind of run its course. We're gonna have to secure the main sort of rump of the empire,
yeah.
slap tariffs on trade coming in. This is no longer expansionist. This is worn out, tired winter behavior.
Hmm.
But if you look at it in that context of, say, America being Rome, which has reached its sort of furthest expansion, maybe with a little sneaky state like Britain whispering in their ear what's going on in Europe or something.
Yeah,
Um, then the question is kind of like, well, what actually happened to Greece? And what happened is that firstly their birth rate went down as well. But what happens is you grow accustomed to living in a way outside of history. I'm not saying that this is particularly desirable. I'm
yeah,
just going to say that this is what's happening. This is what's coming. So you end up in this sort of permafrost, which those countries have kind of been in forever anyway. Most
hmm.
of most of the existence of man exists almost outside of history. With the West, you get this impression that you're on this sort of speeding train all of the
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
It's this relentless change, relentless progress. And there comes a time when that stops, and you think, okay, what is it? What was all that about? Where are we now? And where you end up with is just back on your land, as a sort of fellaheen, outside of metropolis, growing plants, and the world will move on to the next power center, where the
yeah.
next part of energy is. And so, for me, the most crucial issue isn't power on the world stage, but mass immigration. Because if you say, well, we're going to enter into this mode where we're going to slow everything down and we will live lives like, say, a farmer does in a remote village in Argentina, if that's even possible, because Europe's obviously it's a hectic, busy part of the world.
Yeah.
It's one thing if you can live in a small town in Chile and not be at the crossroads of great power politics. This is a problem. But leaving that aside, leaving that aside,
Yeah.
you will then be in a kind of okay, our living standards will go down. There'll be no more of this boom and bust kind of thing, and we will live more basic, back to normal lives again, which most people have always done. The problem with mass immigration is that that makes it almost impossible. If you are then now demographically outnumbered,
Yeah.
I mean, a good example of this would be what's happening with Ireland. Ireland, you go to Ireland like 40 years ago, and it really was like a backwater where the roads were terrible. It had poor infrastructure. They lived a kind of agrarian life, but they were happy. They were happy enough. And
Mm.
now you see that it's just overrun with all of these global homo tech corporations. It's a
Yeah.
tax haven. And
Yeah.
a lot of the Irish are terrified because they think Donald Trump is going to take all of that out and it would just tank their economy overnight.
Mm.
Now, this is an interesting litmus test, I think, because he's going to offer them the same incentives to go back to America. And because Ireland has based itself on being a low tax or even tax-free haven for Amazon or Google or Apple or whatever, that's gonna be a major problem. And so it's a sort of litmus test. And it's kind of like, do you actually want to have all of these cancerous corporations nesting in your country spreading filth?
Mm.
Or let them go and take the hit
Take the
on
hit.
living material conditions? And I'm all in on saying, yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy for to have dwindling GDP
Yeah.
and for people to live more basic, simple lives. And in the case of Ireland, that would only amount to going back to how they lived in the 1980s. And I
Hmm.
don't think that's such a bad thing. The alternative to that is uh extinction. It's being outnumbered by others on your own homeland.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a quick note to the audience, and I'm going to pronounce this like an American. The Coming Caesars is by Amory de Riencourt or Riencourt. So just so you know, it's pretty cheap right now too, because it came out in 1957. Do you see a return to some sort of feudalism, or is feudalism or a feudal aesthetic in the making in the nodes that you're speaking with online? You know, kind of like a chivalry and kind of a more humble relationship to God the Father and time and history and all of that.
Sorry about that. I just had a call. No, what I see in terms of neo-feudalism is the danger of being sort of enslaved to tech oligarchs
Yeah.
and hedge funds and central banks and all the rest of it.
Yeah. And there's no, I just don't see how, if you go back to a pre-liberal era, you still need some sort of patrimony class, some sort of elite class that takes care of its people. And that elite class has to be somehow immune or disgusted by neoliberalism and, you know, all the benefits of GDP growth and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
how you jumpstart that.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe in localism at the end of the day.
Hmm.
But and I think what will end up happening is hopefully people are just thinking about their own local communities and all of this kind of thing.
Hmm. Hmm. So, do you agitate politically, or are you content with being more of an analyzer of political trends?
What do you mean agitate? I don't know. I'm not a member of any organizations
Do you run for?
or
You don't
anything
run
like
for
that.
parliament or anything like that. You don't have any designs.
No, no, I'm too antisocial for any of that. I'm not in any of that.
Yeah.
No, I just live a quiet life and
Hmm.
do me blogging and
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
What are you focusing on coming up now with your blog, with your intellectual work?
I've got one. Well, I just posted one today, actually, a few hours ago,
Hmm.
where I'm discussing. It's a kind of sequel to the one I did the week before about the grooming gangs and Reactor 5 and everything. And today, what I'm interested in is that in Britain, I tend to mainly focus on Britain more than I don't. I know it's like the big fashion where everybody talks about America, but I try and focus mainly on my own country.
Yeah.
But what I'm interested in is that I go back to the 1980s with when you had Margaret Thatcher came in, which was kind of the advent of neoliberalism and whatnot. And back in the media and in culture, there was the sort of the liberal establishment. They just absolutely despised Margaret Thatcher. But what I find interesting is that they were offering commentary on the way things were in Britain and on the material conditions that were coming in because of Thatcher. Mainly in the first sort of 4 years, it was because of the poverty and the hardship, because of the smashing of the unions, closing down of the mines and heavy
Hmm.
industry and things. And then later it was because of the greed inherent, the greed is good sort of era of
Yeah.
the late 80s. But what I like today, we don't really have anything which addresses honestly the conditions that we're living in.
Yeah.
So you end up with like a population which wanders around, sort of bedazzled and disorientated. And if you go back to a different era, say I use the Thatcher years as a jumping off point, what you would find is that they that was there for to give people a framework of how to kind of understand what was going on around them and have a stimulating discussion. But because now everything's astroturfed and everything comes out of we call them quangos, like a quangocracy,
Hmm.
um, like an NGO. The
Hmm.
the it isn't reflective of what people are thinking or how people are looking at things in the world. It doesn't. So when they look at the media, when they look at a movie or a drama, we had big dramas on in the 1980s about unemployment and about people being fired, things. Today, that would be the equivalent of, say, dealing with becoming a minority on your street, all the shops are closing down in
Yeah.
the city centers. Even if you want to just say that's because people are ordering online. You know, it doesn't always have to be that there's this sinister plot to destroy the country. Even just some of these emergent things
Yeah.
are not there to be discussed at all. And what you find is that people are completely confused and disoriented because why is this happening? Why that these changes are here? They're obviously negative, but when I look to the television, obviously it's different because of the internet.
Hmm.
You've got that there, but I didn't want to sort of overemphasize how important that was. And so they walk around disorientated and confused and alienated from life, like not really understanding what's going on all around them.
Hmm.
And I've found that if you actually engage people in the real world in these conversations, they're actually they don't mind talking to you about it, and they're a bit more base than what you might think.
Hmm.
It's interesting. I've always had more sympathy for the normies than many other people in our scene, I think.
Hmm. I wonder to what extent it seems like what is called the woke kind of spell is being broken in America right now on the media level. We'll see how far that goes. But with the internet and competition and just how much they bungled the last 8 years specifically, and since COVID, the media really bungled a lot, and then all the trash that they're producing now is just not hitting with audiences. There is kind of a market for media that addresses the normie life as it is, and then kind of building up or celebrating the standard American story. I wonder if that is being translated over in Britain, or are you guys still beholden to a unified BBC is in bed with the government and they're all hiding up or producing the same sort of content, producing the same sort of story that doesn't line up with reality, and the people of Britain aren't able to see anything else or communicate these other stories. Is there an opening? Do you feel?
I think the recent sort of Elon Musk's diatribes against the government was a broadside. I think that was like a sort of firing off the first salvos,
Really?
as if to break down what was happening in Britain, because within Britain itself, there's not really. I mean, you don't hear as much about the transsexual stuff anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, the establishment's still hypersensitive about racial and ethnic and religious issues.
Mm.
I mean, I did a video a while ago, about 6 weeks ago now, called what so called "Will Britain Become a Woke North Korea?" Where because everybody else is moving right and we've just had a Labour government in, and will it
Yeah.
be where we of the woke world order of the 2010s and early 2020s, will we be like Cuba or North Korea, this kind of relic of a dead political formula? So
Hmm.
when when like America gets it goes back to the 1980s and everything's becomes positive and it's rah 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 and everything,
Yeah.
and we've still got the rainbow flag and George Floyd
Yeah.
Day and all of that
Yeah.
kind of thing. I don't know. I don't know. It depends on the dynamic between Labour and where the Labour government, how are they going to play it, as we were talking about before, kind of lumping themselves in with Europe or going their own way or whatnot. But the Labour government had people over, which is election interference, like deliberately trying to undermine and
Yeah.
go against. So they've and Keir Starmer hasn't even been invited to the inauguration in a few days'
Hmm.
time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll have to see. As it stands now, there's been no change.
Yeah.
Not really anything to speak of.
Well, where is the British male ambition aimed? Other than, I mean, I'm sure a certain number of males want to exist and get ahead in the system as it is, but is there a dissident drive that you feel that you can connect with your nodes and the work that you do, and is that a possible vector?
To be honest, not really. There's a few things happening with people forming small grouplets and communities and trying to do off-grid little things like
Yeah.
that. But I mean, I've been to there's a conference which I've been to a couple of times, which is a lot of sort of like Carl Benjamin, A goes there, and
Yeah.
a few others. And there's a lot of discussion about what to do there, where do we go, and this kind of thing. But that's about it. I
Mm.
don't think there certainly isn't some kind of unified underground movement or
Yeah.
this kind of thing.
Well, there was some unrest at the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, if I recall
Yeah.
correctly. Did that resolve or lead into
Well,
anything stable?
pretty much everybody who was anywhere near it got thrown in jail for years.
Yeah.
So, and this was under a new government as well. And so once again, it kind of touches on what I was saying about the post that I did today, that it people just think that there's something not right about that, because if you're confronted on a day-to-day basis, and you see these foreigners committing the most hideous of crimes, and they only get like 1 or 2 years in jail, but somebody who was somewhere near that riots going on, will be in jail for years. Or the classic is, of course, somebody goes to jail for a post on for a tweet or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
And so all of this is just this kind of rancid, demoralizing kind of
Yeah.
thing which goes on in Britain.
Yeah. I don't know how that changes, but I guess maybe it just there's a slow collapse, or the best of you all moved to
Well,
America or found a
the
colony in Africa or something.
the problem is that I think that is if we look at what to get to the nitty gritty of the woke, and the end of the woke or what happens, you have to have a degree of buy-in from a population. You have to have a political formula which resonates with people. Otherwise, you in Britain, I mean, you mentioned the riots, and there was different reasons for that. Obviously, the direct result was these little girls were murdered. And you see that the country is actually like a tinderbox, and it went up like one as well. Well, I
Mm.
mean, it's we kind of sort of over egg. It wasn't all over the country, but it was
Yeah.
large. It was quite what it wasn't an insignificant amount of unrest. And this is a result of people just not buying into the political formula, not believing it anymore. As I mentioned earlier with Chernobyl, where you've just got a power there rather than
Mm.
anything to believe in. And this isn't good. This isn't good for the elites either.
Hmm.
And so when they're seen to be kind of putting the woke away a little bit, maybe people will buy back into that. But that's a lot easier to do when you've got cool dudes like Donald Trump or Elon Musk than what it is when you've got like Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, because you've just got the fundamental problem that people are just so sick and tired of the British
Yeah.
establishment that so they could actually swerve. I mean, it's funny because they've actually been deporting more illegal immigrants than far more than the
Really.
Tories did. But nobody cares, nobody believes it because they're just so you
Yeah.
know demoralized.
Yeah. Do you think you'll leap from blogging to publishing? And probably you probably already have been published, but do you have books in the works or already on your shelf?
I'm busy just in my own time as a side project. I've got a fictional work
Mm.
which I work on like a kind of fantasy book.
Mm.
If it ever sees the light of day, I don't know. I have done quite a bit of it. I tend not to make such a big thing of it because I don't want to have lots of pressure placed on me to
Yeah.
get it done and everything. So I just keep it. I'll pick it up and I'll get stuck into it when I have the time. It's all so I don't have any pressure. But I'm quite proud of it, and I'm quite happy to do that.
Mm.
And I think one of the things, well, I mean, one of the things I like about writing is that you can always try and hone your craft and get better.
Mm.
Whereas whereas especially streams, I'm not a big fan of this format that we're doing now.
Hmm.
But
Despite
then even
your 8 hour millennial
yeah, that's
appearances.
kind of I build up takes throughout the year and then
Oh, okay.
offload it in one jamboree at the end of the year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do classic movies with Endeavour as well, which is a bit more low key.
Hmm.
But I think there's only so far you can go with it. I think it's the video. I really like the video essay, but that seems to be falling out of fashion now. But you could go on the video essay and you could hone your craft,
Yeah.
kind of. But on just writing a sort of 1,500 to 2,000 word essay, I like to do that because I like this kind of thing, the turns of phrase and how
Hmm.
things match up and that kind
Hmm.
of thing. So that's what I've always preferred to do the most.
Who, there's an audience that reads you, but who's the audience that you write to? Who are you most concerned with? If there's a kind of like just the outline of a person.
It would probably be a disaffected. Uh, it wouldn't be Zoomers. I don't think I've got very many Zoomer readers,
Hmm.
and it would probably be an average Englishman, above higher intelligence, who is. I've got a friend who's kind of like that. All women, and it would be sort of in the 30s and the 40s,
Hmm.
inquisitive about the world, and kind of familiar with a lot of the writers and the authors because I will name drop people in from time to
Hmm.
time. That I think something like that. Mainly, it's probably a purely platonic fiction in my own mind, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's probably that.
Is there uh, like a path for the millennials, that group that you're talking about, to power or to sovereignty? The kind of a skipped generation from your point of view.
It is. Well, at the moment, it's the Gen Xers are ruling Britain.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer's kind of older, but he's the oldest one we've had for a while, I think.
Okay.
But I think there's definitely a new generation. What One of the interesting things that I see on the British right is that there's a lot of young men who are super clued up about all of these issues.
Yeah.
I mean, people like that Connor,
Yeah.
Tomlinson. There seems to be like this new network of them coming up, which I quite like to see, and just from a distance, just sort of casually
Yeah.
observing it and thinking, yeah, this we didn't have that 5 years ago.
Yeah.
We didn't have this degree that they're slick and they're very good at talking, and
Yeah.
they've read all of the theory, and which wasn't around. People can be a little bit harsh when well, there's all these 3 hour streams about these, like Thomas Carlyle or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, well, and you can see that in fairness, what was actually happening there was a training program for another generation of young men who hid their power, will hide their power levels, and they're quick on their feet, and they know
Hmm.
all the stuff. And I'm quite excited to see that emerging in
Yeah.
Britain, to be honest.
I think that's probably one of the most brilliant things that Carl Benjamin has done in his career is to establish kind of a boarding school for the next generation or people younger than him, and then facilitate their claiming their own voice under the Lotus Eaters umbrella. But I think
That's
it.
Yeah, they do good stuff. I mean, I've written they have a quarterly magazine called Islander, which
Hmm.
I've written
Hmm.
for as well. I think there's one coming out soon, which I've got an article in. So yeah, that's all good stuff.
So, what's your who are your top thinkers, like past and then present too? So, Spangler's one, and
I don't really have any in the present, I don't think.
really, yeah, just people that you
Um,
speak with, kind of your
probably
comrades.
probably some of my peers
Yeah.
who I pay notice to. I'll pay attention to people like Academic Agent or
Hmm.
Distributist. I think is great.
Yeah.
But I mean, if I look at the bookshelf, there's not very much that's new, to be honest.
Hmm.
Um, I'll maybe the odd novel or here or there. But then, yeah, I like Spengler's the biggest influence on me. But I think of looking back over recent stuff that I've been reading, I read a lot of stuff to do with fiction and narratives and things like that.
Hmm.
Right now, I've been reading T.H. White's Once and Future King, the about
Oh.
King Arthur, and it's kind of strange because that ties into this idea of I wasn't looking for it either. I was genuinely just looking for the kind of King Arthur mythos, but you still it's there's 4 books contained within it,
Hmm.
and so you begin and it's very light-hearted and very even childish and whimsical. And then it begins to get grimmer and grimmer as darker as Arthur grows older, until in the end, the final book, "The Candle in the Wind," is about betrayal and treachery and dark magic,
Hmm.
and in the middle portion of the book, in the second part, the Queen of Air and Darkness. There's a long discourse between Arthur and Merlin on power. And Arthur and his friend are talking about how it's obviously the case that might makes right. And Merlin is very worried about this kind of mode of thinking that they've got.
Hmm.
And he warns them against that. And it's a long discourse that goes backwards and forwards. And what Merlin says is eventually you're going to have to make men look up to you and love you, and they won't in Might Makes Right. So Arthur rides into battle, and he rides straight past all of the infantry and the peasants that have been rounded up. And he instructs his knights to do the same, and they head straight for the lords. They're the kings of Scotland, and he heads straight for King Lot and his knights. And the reasoning is, And they are also willing to pay money for any soldiers who've had their arms and legs chopped off, this
Hmm.
kind of thing. So what he does is go straight for to cut the head off the beast. And therefore, the people will love him and see him as the legitimate ruler because he's bound to the common man. All the
Hmm.
way down to the bottom, he's got their interests. And then as the book progressed, so the point has been made. There's something more. That the point has been made that might is not the might makes right is not the best form of rule.
Hmm.
But then as it goes on, of course, because of the dark magic, the arrival of Mordred and corruption, he finds out that actually the within his own inner sanctum there's all kinds of betrayal and all kind of deceit and dishonesty going on, and it all unravels and the land begins to die and rot. And it's kind of the fact that it's in like four sections, like four seasons,
Hmm.
really. I think I'm pretty sure it was four, and I was thinking we're back to it again. We're back to spring and summer, and then into winter again. Even though I wasn't actually looking for it, or it just happened
Hmm.
to be there, and it seems to be something that I can't escape.
Hmm. There's an aspect of the dissident right discourse that does tend towards might is right. Analyzing the world through the Machiavellian lens is one very difficult, and two, it just goes against our political instincts on a variety of ways. About the good. Machiavelli is very real. I'm wondering if you see the same tendency of might is right in the emergent right now that is missing the mark or could miss the mark, a lack of wisdom. Is there a place for Merlin to come in and counsel this movement, not to embracing liberalism or putting away their nationalism or their self-interest, but tempering it and aiming it toward, I guess, in the story that you just told, like being a beloved ruler, rather.
I think the danger there is this is the problem with the elite theory, which the kind of the get out there will be that there are these sort of perennial truths which are baked in, which don't even need to be discussed. Whereas I would say, well, if you have as a core part of your philosophy the well-being of a particular group, then you're going to have constraints placed upon you. There has to be some overarching morality, which guides your worldview, which it does with me as well.
Hmm.
I always try and have front and center in a kind of is this good for us or bad for us,
Hmm.
and I mean it as the native British people.
Hmm.
So I think I've already got that sort of baked in.
Yeah.
Whereas I think if it's just purely about power, you have to think, well, what's it for at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Now, there's other people who would say you have to have more of a Christian influence on that as well to temper it. But it is true that, if it's purely about power and gaining power, like to do what? For what? For what purpose?
Hmm. Hmm.
Just for its own sake. Whereas, and you can there's a whole discourse around that. But I mean, the people that I see, they are all coming in from a nationalist sort of hue of one sort or another.
Hmm. Well, Morgoth, you're a fascinating individual. Your writing's excellent. Your content is excellent too. Where can people find you, and what are they going to find, generally speaking, when they get there?
Well, Morgoth's review on Substack. I've got, as of the 16th, there's a new article gone up today. And everything that I do goes on there. So podcast appearances or live streams, or if I do a video essay, everything that I do goes on there. But I'm also still on YouTube and Twitter, though I'm going to try and not use that as much.
Why not? Is it bad for your mental
It just
health?
gives us I just get a headache from it. It's just,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cool.
yeah,
Thank you.
well, I don't like Twitter. Everybody complains about it, so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, yeah. It's a useful tool, but it can be a tool that very easily can end up using you more than you use it, for sure. It's very tricky in that way. I had another question, but I forgot it. I just totally forgot it. Do you have a hobby that's not writing? Something with your hands and your
Yeah, I've got
body?
lots. I do gardening quite a lot. I
Yeah.
brew beer. I like to go
Oh.
fishing. I go walking. Yeah, I'm quite a busy chap.
Oh wow.
I
You
so I
you.
mean, sometimes I write about that as well. I write about garden. I used to do videos when I went fishing and things like that.
Oh really? Just the pastoral landscapes.
Yeah, because it was sort of it was just normal activity. I think I'm just a normal fella, really.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and you know how people say like touch grass, like
Yeah.
I'll literally do that as well. I
Yeah.
mean, it's funny because somebody will reply, "Oh, touch grass," and I'll have just like turned over a ton of compost or planted beans or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you you mentioned strategy games. Are you a board gamer at all? A strategy game player at all?
No, I don't really play games that much. I used to play strategy games,
Hmm.
um, like Age of Empires and Sins of a Solar Empire, but
Yeah.
I don't have time for that anymore.
Yeah. No time for that. Yeah. The days of youth. Halcyon days of
Yeah,
youth.
long gone.
Excellent. Morgoth, I'm very happy to have had you on. Thank you very much for your time. I'm glad to introduce my meager audience to your work, and I'm sure they're going to find a lot there. I was just reading your essay from last week about the Grimmigangs and the systemic failure on the level of Chernobyl that's happening over in your country. I really do hope that some path towards reconciliation and actual justice and accountability can happen there. I hope it's inevitable. I don't know if it is or not.
Well, me too. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to end the recording now.